Hello and welcome to World Panorama, your weekly roundup of the top international stories. I'm Tracy Shilshi and here are the headlines. Former Brazil President Lula da Silva is sentenced to nearly 10 years in prison for corruption and money laundering. Lula claims the investigation against him is a campaign to prevent his return to power, vows he will seek re-election. Celebrations erupt across Iraq as the Prime Minister declares victory against Islamic State in Mosul. Haider al-Abadi visits Mosul to congratulate the forces. Long road to recovery begins in the beleaguered city. Trouble brews for Pakistani Prime Minister as JIT report concludes he and his family concealed assets from tax authorities. Opposition and media calls for the PM's resignation, but Nawaz Sharif says he will not step down. And Donald Trump attends the Bastille Day parade in Paris. US and French troops march together down the Champs-Élysées. Parade marks 100 years since the Americans entered World War I. Our top story, former President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, has been found guilty of corruption and money laundering and sentenced to nearly 10 years in prison. He will remain free pending an appeal, but political analysts claim that this is the end of his career. Lula has repeatedly denied taking any bribes and has described the investigation against him as a campaign to prevent his return to power. Here's a report. A stunning fall from grace for the 71-year-old iconic leftist leader. Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was convicted and handed a 9.5-year prison term on Wednesday for allegedly receiving about $1.1 million in improvements and expenses from a construction company for a luxury seaside apartment. In exchange, prosecutors said the company was able to obtain lucrative contracts from Petrobras, the state-controlled oil giant. Reports say that during his trial, Lula da Silva was questioned for hours but remained defiant. He proclaimed his innocence and said that it was politics and not the pilfering of public funds that put him on trial. His supporters and allies continue to stand by the statements.
Former President Lula is innocent. The legal team is going to work on the appeal. Lula is innocent. It is really a case of great injustice.
Lula da Silva's legal team has said that they will appeal against the ruling and have continuously blasted the trial as a partisan witch hunt, accusing Judge Sergio Moro of being biased and out to get the former president for political reasons. Judge Moro has denied the allegations, but da Silva's conviction has yet again stirred the debate among citizens and reactions have been mixed. The verdict represents the high-profile conviction yet in the sweeping corruption investigation that for over 3 years has rattled Brazil. The verdict also sent a dramatic message to much of Brazil's political class that they too risked falling afoul of the anti-graft drive. Even the current president, Michel Temer, has been charged with taking bribes, and several of his ministers have resigned after corruption claims were made. But one cannot deny the fact that Judge Moro is often cited as da Silva's closest rival in hypothetical matchups in the presidential race, though Judge Moro has ruled out running for office.
I don't think there was a reason for sentence. I don't think Lula should have been sentenced. It doesn't matter how important you are. The law is above all of us. If he did something wrong, and apparently he did, he has to pay for his crimes.
Da Silva's conviction tarnishes the legacy of one of Brazil's most commanding political figures, the country's first working-class president who left office 6 years ago with an 83% approval rating. The charismatic leader challenged the military dictatorship and nurtured global ambitions for his nation, helping land the 2014 World Cup and the 2016 Olympics. Former US President Barack Obama had once labeled him the most popular politician on earth. Despite multiple corruption allegations against him, Lula had announced his intention to run for president in next year's election and has been widely considered a leading contender. But the ruling could be a crippling blow to his aspirations. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV. All right, so to take us through the implications really of this on a country like Brazil, we've got Professor Abdul Nafe from the Center of Canadian, US and Latin American Studies at JNU. Professor Nafe, thanks so much for being here with us. Like we said, there are very few people, at least in India, who understand what it really means for Brazil at this point, and for that matter, even Latin America. But, it's been going on for 3 years. You also had Dilma Rousseff, which was a big news, of course, the impeachment that took place. You have the current president, of course. There are, of course, a scandal going on as far as that's concerned as well. And then, of course, now Lula da Silva. How do you see this trend going? And is this really a warning to the political class there?
2-3 points quick.
Yes.
Lula was the final target of the campaign. And I think the right wing is succeeding in that. It marks a very important shift in power in Brazil. Brazil is reverting back to the rule by a white, land-owning, evangelical, export-oriented, resource export class. They want to take Brazil away from what Lula had been wishing to do. Focus on social spending, improve agricultural productivity, distribute land, bring some kind of equity and justice in the rural areas, strengthen manufacturing. This was all the program of the Workers' Party. It has all been reversed. Brazil is back to the rule by a white oligarchic class.
Yes.
And Lula was the main stumbling block in it. This judgment 2 days back is actually meant to remove him from the 2018 elections.
And do you
Workers'
think it is
Party had
actually
won
going to make an impact on his political career? Do you think it will?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Not necessarily, because corruption is so widespread and endemic. Even Michel Temer will not remain immune to it for a very long time.
Yes.
You know what Lula and Dilma Rousseff had done was bring some very important constitutional and electoral changes. For example, making the office of Attorney General very independent of the Congress and the presidency. Also, they strengthened the judicial system in a very strong way. And then most important legal reform was that they introduced a law allowing for plea bargaining. Now, everybody who is involved in corruption is now making a plea bargain, and therefore this corruption is coming out.
Yes.
So even some of those who are against him will not really go scot-free. This is my reading of the situation.
All right.
But there is no case against Lula. I have seen and examined this case for the last 3 years.
But this is just one of the 5 charges or the 5 cases
Madam,
that are
he had
against
been
him.
seen once or twice entering an apartment. And he then comes out after a few minutes. Some secret agent said this apartment belongs to him. How does it belong to him?
So do you
And what is the great charge? That Lula took a bribe of $7 lakh.
Yes. Do you think the allegations from the Workers' Party, from Lula da Silva itself, saying that this is cooked up, that the judiciary is acting also in a biased manner?
Yeah, it is cooked up.
It definitely is that. Okay, but what do you make of the fact that, Lula da Silva is not the only one? Of course, his close ally Dilma Rousseff, of course, also had to be impeached on corruption charges. But apart from that, the very fact that there are others also in line, you also have a Temer, who seems to be a complete opposite of what, Lula stands for. But even he is embroiled in corruption scandals. So do you think there's a bigger picture there?
Let's make a distinction. One, Dilma Rousseff was not impeached on grounds of corruption. She was removed from office on grounds of committing a budgetary impropriety.
Okay.
There is no case against her. Then let's look at Michel Temer. He belongs to a party which is neck deep into corruption. Brazilian PMDB, Social Democratic Movement Party as it is called, is actually a kind of a political machine. All kinds of factions and elements exist in it. Right-winger, former guerrillas, businessmen, peasant leaders, young students, all kinds of characters are there in it. And this party intends only to access power, which they have been doing for the last 30 years.
Yes.
It is a kingmaker's party. they always get the maximum seats in the Congress.
Okay.
Whosoever is the president would always give their support. And this is the way they engineer the presidency into their own game.
Okay.
And Michel Temer heads that party.
Okay.
This is how he had bargained a vice presidency for himself in 2014.
In fact, as we're speaking also, a congressional committee in Brazil has voted against recommending Michel Temer to be tried in the Supreme Court on corruption charges. Of course, it's not a done deal, but it of course softens definitely on him. So, what you're saying, of course, holds true to a certain
after the removal of Dilma Rousseff, everybody is saying, let's declare amnesty now. Let's bring an end to this corruption investigation. Let's derail the whole car wash
Operation
scandal.
Car Wash, yes.
Now, who were those people? Again, these were the ruling PMDB senators in the Congress. 31 out of 81 senators are under criminal investigation in Brazil.
Okay.
And all of them belong to PMDB.
All right. Interesting times, really, definitely for the country. And like you say, it's not the end of Lula.
No, it's not the
and
end
if
of
you
Lula.
actually look at the polls, and how they have been, at least before this, the conviction or the order by the court, it has been in huge favor of Lula. So maybe he
Conservatives don't want a fifth victory for the Workers' Party.
All right. We'll have to wait and see how things go there. But thank you so much, Professor, for joining us. And actually talking about a topic which, like I said, it's something which interests us, but we don't have in-depth knowledge about. But thank you for adding that knowledge for us. Thank you so much for joining us. Meanwhile, let's head on to the other big story of the week, and that was Iraq's story. Prime Minister declared victory over Islamic State in Mosul on Monday, and 3 years that came after the militants seized the city and made it the stronghold of the caliphate that they said would take over the world. Haider al-Abadi made the announcement over the operations room of the counter-terrorism service. He arrived in Mosul on Sunday to congratulate the military commanders who waged a nearly 9-month battle to recapture the city from the Islamic State.
Spontaneous celebrations erupted throughout Iraq on Monday following Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi's former declaration of victory over Islamic State in Mosul. This 3 years after the militants seized the city and made it the stronghold of a caliphate they said would take over the world.
I'll announce from here to the whole world the end and the failure and the collapse of terrorist state of falsehood and terrorism which the terrorist Daesh announced from Mosul 3 years ago. By the sacrifices of Iraqis and the efforts and their blood, we were able to achieve victory over this mean and murderous state and send it to the trash heap of history.
Hundreds of Iraqis gathered in downtown Baghdad to celebrate the declaration. Many, driving in their cars, honked horns and flew Iraqi flags out of windows. Residents of southern Iraqi city of Basra too celebrated the victory over the Islamic State.
As you can see, victory has brought happiness and joy to all the Iraqi people. We pray to the Almighty God that peace and security prevails in Iraq. Iraqi people have suffered a lot, and we hope that Mosul people will return to their homes.
What I feel is like all other honorable and honest Iraqi people, and God willing, we will get rid of all the corrupt politicians who helped them and take Mosul. The White House congratulated the Iraqi Prime Minister after he made the declaration of victory.
Iraqi security forces, supported by the United States and the global coalition, liberated the city of Mosul from its long-time nightmare under the rule of ISIS. We congratulate Prime Minister Abadi, the Iraqi security forces, and all the Iraqis for their victory over terrorists who are the enemies of all civilized people.
Meanwhile, calm prevailed in eastern Mosul. Streets were busy with cars and residents were trying to resume their life. Though a few plumes of smoke were visible on the eastern side of the city, the sound of bombings and burst of gunfire were absent for the first time since the start of the fighting with Islamic State more than 8 months ago.
God willing, the situation will get better now that we got rid of world's largest terrorist network and we got rid of its oppression. God willing, we will remove destruction and damage caused by Daesh and normal life will return to the city. God willing, peace and security would prevail. We are happy. Streets have been paved and work is on to restore water. The situation is much better than it was under Daesh.
It is indeed the moment for the Iraqis to celebrate. But the battle for Mosul, which has lasted more than 9 months, has left large areas in ruins, killed thousands of civilians and displaced around 1 million others. The most pressing issue is the need to bring back hundreds of thousands of displaced Sunni civilians. But Iraq has failed to rebuild and resettle some other communities freed from the Islamic State, as tensions between Sunni minority and the majority Shiites still undermine efforts to reunite the country. The road ahead will indeed be a long and arduous one. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
With that, a quick break here, but more news follows in a bit. Stay with us.
I think they're ready to surrender.
आईएनए की भागी फौजियों पर अंग्रेज देशद्रोह का मुकदमा चलाएंगे।
उन तीनों के बचने के चांसेस कम हैं।
ये कोई आम केस नहीं, कोर्ट मार्शल है। बोला भाई, ये केस आप कांग्रेस के लिए नहीं, सुभाष बोस के लिए लड़ी।
Lieutenant Gobak Singh Dillon, Captain Shah Nawaz Khan, Captain P.K. Sehgal. Section 41, waging war against the king. You are charged with murder. Do you plead guilty to the charges read out?
ईमानदारी से आजादी के लिए लड़ने वाली अगर कोई फौज है तो उसका नाम है आजाद हिंद फौज।
The safety, honor and welfare of your country comes first, always.
British Indian Army hand you over to the Japanese Imperial Army.
हिंदुस्तान और अंग्रेजों के बीच एक धागा था, वो टूट गया।
इस बार कुछ ऊपर नीचे हुआ तो देश में बवाल मच जाए। अब जनता किसी अंग्रेज को नहीं छोड़ेगी।
रात दिन अपने सीने विच वजदी आजादी दे राग नू बंद कर ला।
अंग्रेजी अफसरों ने साडी हिफाजत नहीं की, तो वो हमारी वफादारी के हकदार किस तरह हो सकते हैं?
आज हिंदुस्तानी फौज के पास अपना असली मकसद है, हिंदुस्तान की आजादी।
तुम मुझे खून दो, मैं तुम्हें आजादी दूंगा।
ये मुकदमा पूरी इंडियन नेशनल आर्मी का है।
क्योंकि हमने वो दिन देखा है जब हमें ऐसा लगा था कि हमने हिंदुस्तान को वाकई आजाद कर दिया।
देश की आजादी की लड़ाई कोर्ट में लड़ी जा रही है और इस वक्त पूरा देश एक साथ तैनात है।
This trial and its judgment shall be remembered throughout history.
Welcome back. The United States' top diplomat sealed a deal to intensify Qatar's counter-terrorism efforts, tackling a central issue in the spat pitting the besieged Gulf nation against 4 other American allies lined up against it. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson outlined the agreement at the end of his first visit to Qatar since its neighbors moved to isolate it over grievances, including what they allege is its support for extremist groups.
The United States and Qatar signed an agreement on Tuesday aimed at combating the financing of terrorism, as US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson visited Doha to try to end a month-long rift between Western allied Arab states.
We signed a memorandum of understanding between the two countries to combat financing terrorism. This memorandum comes in the light of the continuous bilateral cooperation between the two countries, the US and Qatar, and as a result of the mutual work in order to halt the mechanisms of terrorism financing and the exchange of experiences and information.
Tillerson said the agreement signed with his Qatari counterpart Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani had been under discussion for months.
No sanctuary on their soil. The agreement in which we both have signed on behalf of our governments represents weeks of intensive discussions between experts and reinvigorates the spirit of the Riyadh summit. The memorandum lays out a series of steps the two countries will take over the coming months and years to interrupt and disable terror financing flows and intensify counterterrorism activities globally. The agreement includes milestones to ensure both countries are accountable to their commitments. Together, the United States and Qatar will do more to track down funding sources, will do more to collaborate and share information, and will do more to keep the region and our homeland safe.
Sheikh Mohammed said the agreement was not linked to the crisis with the 4 Arab countries, which the United States fears could impact its military and counter-terrorism operations and increase Iran's influence in the region. The Qatari minister also said his country had not broken any promise under the Riyadh Agreement, a previously secret accord between Riyadh and Doha.
What was mentioned and supported in the media campaign over Qatar not abiding by Riyadh Agreement is all problematic. The state of Qatar abided by all the clauses of the agreement, and there is a documentation that proves that Qatar abided by this agreement. And it's a collective agreement. It's not only for Qatar. It's an agreement for all the countries to abide, and Qatar wasn't singled out to abide by this agreement.
Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates and Egypt imposed sanctions on Qatar last month, accusing it of financing extremist groups and allying with the Gulf Arab states arch for Iran, something Doha denies. The 4 Arab states say Qatar had pledged to desist from interfering in its neighbors' politics in the 2013 agreement. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
And now to Pakistan, where Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif is facing a formidable legal and political challenge after the Panama probe report was submitted. Here are more details. Senior leaders of Pakistan's main opposition, Tehreek-e-Insaf Party, led by Imran Khan, meeting to discuss their next strategy. Opposition demands for Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif's resignation have grown louder after the joint investigation team probing the Panama Papers allegations submitted its report in the Supreme Court this week. The Panama case probe panel's report recommended filing of a graft case against the Prime Minister and his family. And the opposition is leaving no stone unturned to bring Sharif down from the PM's post.
After this JIT report, Nawaz Sharif has lost moral, legal and political justification. He should immediately resign.
For now, the Supreme Court has sought objections from all parties in the Panama Papers case within a week, and the next hearing of the case is scheduled for the 17th of July. The 6-member JIT that probed the Sharif family's business dealings in its 10-volume report recommended that a corruption case should be filed against Sharif and his sons Hassan and Hussein Nawaz, as well as daughter Maryam Nawaz. It found Sharif and his children to be living beyond the known means of income. His daughter Maryam tweeted saying JIT report rejected, every contradiction will not only be contested but decimated in the Supreme Court. Not a penny of public exchequer involved. Sharif's close aide and Defence Minister Khwaja Asif also said that they will challenge the report in the Supreme Court.
This is a political war, not a legal war. We will fight this battle in Supreme Court.
There should not be any doubt about it. We will demolish every allegation, one by one. We will exercise all legal options available with us. This is not the end of the story. The story has begun now.
ये कहानी का इख्तिताम नहीं हुआ, अभी तो कहानी शुरू हुई है.
In April this year, the Supreme Court ruled that there was insufficient evidence to remove Sharif from office on the back of the Panama Papers leaks, but it ordered further investigations. The JIT was formed on the 5th of May to ascertain the money trail of the Sharif family-owned properties in Park Lane in London. Apart from evidence, the JIT report also includes statements of the Prime Minister and his family members. It was for the first time a sitting Pakistani premier had appeared before any investigative agency. Disqualifying Sharif would leave his party in power, but it would cause intense turmoil at a time when Pakistan is experiencing modest growth and improved security after years of violence, and the civilian government and powerful military have appeared to have come to uneasy terms. Bureau Report, Raj Sabha TV. And here's a quick roundup of the other international news of the week in Globe Watch.
Nobel laureate Liu Xiaobo, who was China's most prominent human rights and democracy advocate, died aged 61. The activist was being treated for terminal liver cancer in a hospital in northeastern China. He had been transferred from prison last month, where he was serving a 11-year term for subversion. A university professor turned rights campaigner, Liu was branded a criminal by the authorities. He was repeatedly jailed throughout his life and had also been subject to heavy restrictions when he was free, while his wife, Liu Xia, is placed under house arrest. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said it had confirmed information that Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi has been killed. Russia's defense ministry said in June that it might have killed Baghdadi when one of its airstrikes hit on the outskirts of the Syrian city of Raqqa. But Washington said it could not corroborate the death, and Western and Iraqi officials have been skeptical. US President Donald Trump's eldest son has released an email chain showing he was keen to accept information on Hillary Clinton from a Russian national. In the email exchange, Goldstone, who set up the meeting, told Trump Jr. that Russian government officials could provide incriminating information about his father's Democratic rival, Hillary Clinton. The emails, which Trump Jr. released on Twitter, showed him welcoming the information and meeting with Russian attorney Natalia Veselnitskaya. After the release of emails, President Donald Trump called his eldest son a high-quality person and applauded his transparency. A Russian court sentenced a man convicted of murdering opposition leader Boris Nemtsov to 20 years in jail. Nemtsov, one of President Vladimir Putin's most vocal critics, was murdered in 2015. He had been working on a report examining Russia's role in the conflict in Ukraine. The court handed the longest sentence of 20 years to Zaur Dadayev, a former soldier in Chechnya, and the main state prosecutors said pulled the trigger. The other 4 Chechen men, convicted of being his accomplices, received jail sentences ranging from 11 to 19 years. One of the biggest icebergs on record has broken away from Antarctica. This has created an extra hazard for ships around the continent. The 1 trillion-ton iceberg, measuring 5,800 square kilometers, carved away from the Larsen C ice shelf in Antarctica sometime between July 10 and 12. The iceberg has been close to breaking off for a few months. Throughout the Antarctic winter, scientists monitored the progress of the rift in the ice shelf using the European Space Agency satellites.
And finally, we leave you with images from France's annual Bastille Day commemorations, where US President Trump was the guest of honor.